The dog's gentle.
All right. So today we've got our 7th PowerPoint. It's our 8th day. And we are breaking down the knee joint. So we're working our way up the kinetic chain. Your knee joint is very greatly affected by your ankle joint. So a lot of what we say today is going to piggyback off of what we talked about yesterday. Definitely associated with one another, but it is a little bit different, right? Like this one doesn't have as much frontal plane movement. This real one is really like a lot of sagittal, and there's some transverse movements that we often do that we're trying to sort of avoid actually. But your knee greatly affected by the joints that are above and below it, right? Like it's very, very, very greatly affected by your ankle, like I just said, but it's also super, super affected from your hip as well. And so like if you have hip tightness, it's going to affect your knee, or even just like poor biomechanics, like if your nervous system is recruiting muscles the wrong way in the hip, it's going to affect your knee. Same thing is true of the ankle, right? If stuff's messing up with your ankle, then your foundation is messed up. I mean, we saw that yesterday in that pronation distortion. Pronation distortion syndrome. When we see someone's feet like falling inward, right, and collapsing, what do we see here, right? Like the knees are caving in, right? When we see that overpronation of the ankle, right here, that causes the tibia to have to come across in the opposite direction to compensate, right, rather than being sort of stacked the way it's supposed to. So obviously this joint is very much going to be influenced by these other joints that are kind of surrounding it. But your knee joint is actually the biggest joint in your body, believe it or not. A lot of times, like you can kind of think like the ball and socket joints, like your hips or your shoulders end up being pretty large, but your knee is a really big one, and it's very complex. It has a lot of, because of how large it is, it does actually have some other materials in it that we don't see in necessarily all of our joints. It's very complex in comparison just because of the extra little pieces here and there. If you look at like all the ligaments, and then it has like meniscuses, and it has like little fat pads, and it has like a bunch of bursa, these little fluid-filled sacs, all this special little stuff that we're going to see inside, that is part of the skeletal system, even if it is not necessarily just bone, it's connective tissue. And so like with so many working parts, it's likely that something could possibly go wrong, and then primarily in terms of motion, it is a hinge joint. The knee joint proper is a hinge joint. However, obviously you have the interaction between like your fibula and your tibia, and that allows you to have rotational movements outside of that hinging. So that is actually going to be where those two bones are interacting. That's a pivot joint. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the injuries here. So there's a bunch of knee injuries out there. We see about 80 to 100,000 ACL injuries. That's just ACL, by the way. There are 4 main ligaments in your knee. And of them, like there's like 100,000 ACL tears every year. And 70% of them are non-contact. Okay, so here's my take on non-contact injuries. Non-contact injuries are kind of a fancy way of saying an injury that really should have never happened. Like non-contact is like, you took a bad step. Your body's designed to be able to deal with the occasional bad step, but if we consistently keep our posture out of alignment, we move the wrong way, ways that were not intended, we tighten up certain muscles. Well, just like the ankle yesterday, like we saw that we are supposed to be able to make ankle inversion, right? Like that inversion where we show the foot towards the midline there, we're supposed to be able to do that. But what ends up happening when someone inverts their ankle and they spend, they're used to spending it all day everted, is that this ends up overstretching the ligament on the lateral side, and yeah, it tears. That's a non-contact injury. It really shouldn't have happened, right? Like they should have had the mobility to kind of deal with that range of motion. Now, obviously, there's really extreme examples, like if they really freaking roll their ankle super far, like no ligament's going to be able to stretch all the way there. But like, when I think of non-contact injuries, I'm like, that's the kind of thing that really should have been avoided. This is why our posture is so important, why we spend all of our time talking about like getting the body into alignment. So the same thing is true of ACL tears. These are going to be tears that usually occur during like a transverse movement within the knee, right? So like someone will usually be planting hard into the ground and then cutting in like the opposite direction. So they'll be making like a twisting with their knee, and that twist often results in, you know, this torn ACL because basically the ligaments just can't stretch that far, and so it just kind of pops off. Usually happens somewhere between 15 and 25 years of age. That's where we see most of our ACL tears, is within that age range there, because that's what the years that most people actually play sports and stuff. Although obviously, like, you know, it definitely can happen later as well. But there's been some research that has been shown that, you know, the good news of all this, it suggests that enhancing your neuromuscular stabilization, so practicing for balance, doing like single leg exercises and things like that, may alleviate the incidence of really all non-contact injuries, but like certainly ACL tears. And so, you know, when we do all that like balancing stabilization stuff that we do in, you know, NASM's first phase of training, it has been shown to set us up with a really strong foundation for how to move and prevent these injuries. Because when you think about, like, let's see here, I'm going to go to Joel Seedman. Now, I will say, this is a physical therapist on Instagram. I will say this guy kind of goes a little bit too far in the realm of stabilization. I think some of his stuff gets a little silly. He's a controversial figure on YouTube. Just about the way he kind of presents things, and like sometimes like he throws these very, very weird exercises out there. However, I will say there's definitely some, like this is a good example here. I don't really see, I think it's impressive, but I don't necessarily see benefits for all clients doing something like this. It's a very weird exercise. And you can see, but like something like this, I'm actually a big fan of. I think this is great. Like, you know, single loaded, you know, and she has to balance while she's doing this. All that like balance. Like, look at, I mean, I've seen this woman on here before. She's a freaking rock star. So I was going to say, look at how her foot's wiggling. Her foot's almost not, because she's so freaking good at all this stuff. But like, you know, you think about like how much like balancing and stabilization has to happen when you're doing like weird stuff like this, you know? So do I approve of everything he does? Not necessarily. I think that this guy can go a little bit too far in the realm of stabilization. So I want to be clear about that. But you can see here, that's a great unstable glute exercise. This right here is fantastic. This is a great exercise that I fully endorse. You can see he's doing a lot of like really great hip extension, right? And then like this band is applying like resistance there, right? And that's Young Ho Koo. He's the kicker for the Falcons, I believe. And then here's Chris Carson for all my Seahawks fans out there, just because I want to mention. But you can see like he's doing barefoot, you know, and he's working on like explosive parts, but then like he's going to spend a lot of his time doing unstable stuff as well. That enhancing of like all the stabilizers in the knee hopefully is going to keep Chris Carson from getting injured. There's like a single leg bent over version there. Again, this is where like, I don't know if I necessarily, I guess that's fine as well. I thought he was going to like go full into like a clean and then a press. Yeah, no, this is all good. I like all this. So anyway, that stabilization stuff has been shown to reduce our risk of any non-contact injury, you know? I think that's where we all want to be. You know, like when it comes to getting hurt, I would much rather be in a place where like I can move and do any sport that I want to do. Maybe I'll end up with an injury, but only if like someone smacks into me. I don't want that injury to be caused from like my own faulty movement patterns, right? So let's talk about some of these most common injuries. So in your kneecap, one of the specialized structures that you are going to see are we're going to say menisci, which is the plural for your meniscuses. You've got a left meniscus and a right one, right? Or a medial one and a lateral one. And if you look at them, kind of zoom in here, you can see this outer ridge on both sides a little bit thicker, and then it gets a little bit thinner towards the middle, and that gives it sort of a downward angle on both sides like this. What that does is that keeps your knee from being able to slide up and over this ridge and dislocate, you know? So that's what your meniscus does. It you'll hear this in the definition later on, I think. It deepens the concavity of the bone, right? So it lives on top of your tibia right here, and it makes it a deeper half pipe, you know? And so that means it's much less likely to be able to kind of like slide out over, you know, the ridges of the tibia on both sides. So what we see is we'll see like different tears in these menisci, right? So like you can see here is just sort of a normal like meniscus tear. This is what's called a bucket handle tear, because it kind of looks like a I was, you know, it's oh, I was about to say, I was like, it's officially October. Nope, that's tomorrow. Yeah, it looks like a candy bucket, you know. But that's the bucket handle tear there. You'll see that sometimes. Those are really severe and a little bit harder to fix. But oftentimes like this happens due to like shear forces, right? And what a shear force is like, imagine if I took something like if I had like tissue paper or something in this hand, and I took my fist and I pressed it into my hand like this, and I pressed really hard and then I twisted. It's being like shorn, right? Like it's being like pulled in different directions all over the place, and chances are that paper is going to kind of tear in certain spots because like there's no resistance in others, but there's lots of resistance in one place. That's sort of a shearing thing. So meniscus tears oftentimes occur during like rotational movements while quickly trying to like change directions. So you'll see people like sprinting and then they're going to stop and try to like sprint the other way or like jerk. That's usually what happens because they plant really hard into the ground, and then as they try to like twist, you know, the femur comes down and it pushes harder into the tibia and it gets compressed, and then that twisting action happens. It should be able to deal with it ideally, but not always, especially if the muscles are not there to support it, right? If the muscles aren't strong enough to kind of deal with this, and instead it's just like passively grinding into itself, you know, yeah, of course something's got to give, right? So that's what we see in meniscus tears there. Okay, so I do want to step into drawing here. We all know I cannot draw to save my life, but I don't know how to teach this without sort of making a fake chart here. So bear with me, guys. So we're going to kind of do the knee here. So here's our femur. It's going to come down and it's got its two little knobs there, right? And then that's going to travel back up. And then we got our tibia, which is going to, you know, be the shin bone, and it's going to come up and it's going to have kind of a ridge so that all of this can kind of sit like that. And then we will have the fibula along the outside right here, and that'll travel down. Oh boy, there we go. And that'll travel down like that. So there's your fibula. There's my best version. So we've got 4 main ligaments in the knee. I know we always talk about the ACL. You hear about the ACL all the time. Like when you're watching the NFL, you're watching the NBA, it's like, oh, ACL tear, this and that, right? So remember, anterior cruciate ligament, right? You've got your anterior cruciate ligament. That's your ACL, right? And that is going to be in the front. So if we look here, you can see we're looking at the front of the knee here. The ACL is going to go from the lateral side to the medial side, and it's going to be in the front. Whoops, go back. So that's your ACL. So if I put that one, I'll put that one in. Come on, make this a little bigger. Where's the, what, am I crazy? I lost my mind. Oh, it's over here. So there's the ACL ligament. It's gonna be this thick little ligament that kind of runs across and grabs right over here. Okay. So there's your ACL. Now you've also got your PCL. I'm gonna put the PCL in dark. I'll put the PCL in dark blue. Okay, so the PCL is your posterior cruciate ligament. Okay. By the way, you can always remember that these cross over one another by looking at the word cruciate. It is similar to the word that means crucifix on a cross, right? So these ligaments are actually, they're not at an angle like this, they're at an angle like this. They cross over one another. So that's why they are the kind of cruciate ligaments here. So PCL is going to be behind. So I'll do this one in dark blue here. And that one runs from the medial side over to the lateral side behind your ACL, right? So it's going to pick up over here and grab. Okay. So there you go. That's the PCL ligament. Okay. So then you have got your LCL and your MCL. These are your collateral ligaments. We think about like lateral, it means on the outside, right? It means, you are moving laterally. So in reference to, maybe not the whole body, but in reference to the bone, if I put another ligament over here and I put another ligament over here, lateral to both sides of the bone, right? That is going to be my MCL and my LCL ligaments as well. So if we go with red here and we put a ligament on this side to kind of create a little bit of stability here. That's on the outside, that's the lateral side. So that's going to be my LCL ligament. And then if we put, we'll go purple, on the medial side, that's my MCL ligament. Okay, so those are the four sort of ligaments you're going to see in here, right? You're going to see your L lateral, collateral ligament. It's your LCL. And that's right here. And then you are going to see the MCL, not to be confused with the MCU. Dumb.
Ligaments do we have to know from the knees? Like, how many are there?
Just these four big ones. That's all you gotta know. Yeah. And again, like, what's that?
Are there more ligaments in the knee?
Not really.
No, just four.
No, there's some fascia and stuff, but these are the big ligaments.
Got it.
Yeah. There are some meniscuses, right? You got to be aware of like the little meniscus here and the meniscus there, right? You got a lateral one and a medial one. But other than that, like these, and then like there are some ligaments, like we're talking about the knee joint today, which is this joint right here. There are little ligaments that hold this together, the fibula and the tibia. There are some ligaments that like attach those. And then you've got this fascia that like runs between the two, but they're not part of the knee proper. So we don't talk about them that often. And honestly, like dislocating or spraining this ligament right here is super hard to do. You need to like
fascia is almost kind of like a sponge to keep everything in place, right? Or
the what?
A fascia is kind of just like to like fill in the space, right?
Yeah, it's like a webbing. It's like a webbing. And I mean, honestly, kind of looks like Spider-Man's webs, like it really does. And it's there to kind of make sure that the grain of a muscle sort of stays moving in the direction it's supposed to. It's like if you imagine like you have like a muscle that would run and attach somewhere, you would have like fascia that kind of covers, like if I want like my 4 quadriceps muscles, right? If I want those to all kind of stay in alignment with one another, I'd have a little bit of fascia around each of them to kind of separate them, but then I'd have maybe some overall fascia around the whole thing to kind of keep them as a group, and that makes sure that like the fibers don't ever get like tangled up, because muscles are cells that are tied end to end in like kind of these big long ropes almost, and every tissue in your body, for the record, guys, actually has some their version of fascia. Like your bones have fascia around the outside of them. It's just we don't call it fascia because fascia is usually associated with muscles. But you have like a connective tissue that separates like the outside borders of your bones, and that way those cells aren't interacting with other stuff, that's actually, we talked about like shin splints yesterday. That's often what like the outer part of like, those little micro fractures that I talk about. That's what sometimes causes that inflammation, is that little like layer of bone around the outside of the shin. But yeah, so these are the big ones. But Hector, to answer your question simply, these are the ones you want to be somewhat familiar with, although you won't really be tested on them. Not in your regular NASM and not in this course. But when you go to take your corrective exercise specialist, like the sub-certification, they may say like, they won't necessarily ask you like where they're connected, but they won't say like which of the ligaments is located in front or anything like that. They're not going to do stuff like that. But what they will say is like, which is there are about 80 to 100,000 of these injuries every year due to decreased stability in the knee. And you're like, oh, okay, so clearly we're talking about the knee. We got this, it's probably an ACL tear, So you will sometimes see stuff like that. Or which of the following injuries is most commonly associated with shear forces? And we know that that's the meniscus tears, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I always tell people. I'm like, those are the questions you look up. You know what I mean? Like, because it doesn't serve you. I don't want to get like ranty or on a soapbox today, because you guys know I've got like a large, so I've been seeing all these like, milk crate challenges on TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, I would stand on all those because I have a lot of opinions. So I don't want to do that today, but I already did it with Joel Seedman and his stability work. However, I will say this, the knowing like how many injuries happen every year is a statistic that makes a really easy test question to write. If I were a company writing test questions, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to quiz them on a number, because that's a, very black and white answer. 80 to 100,000, I'd say 600,000 to 1 million, like I'd give the wrong options. It's easy test questions, right? Just like in school, it was easy test questions to say, what year did this war start? It's an easy question to write, but it doesn't really serve you. Like it doesn't serve you in the world. Like, like what good does it know? The only thing that's valuable about knowing that is like, oh, okay, this is a thing that happens to a lot of people. I should be aware of it. That's the only reason they're going to ask you about stuff like this. So look it up. Keep it in your book. Don't keep it in here. It's taking up valuable space if it's up here. Soapbox over. All right. So those are the ligaments, right? So the ACL tear, right? So you can start to imagine what would happen if I pulled this bone, right? If I swung this bone right here out this way, right? And then I swung this bone, away in the same direction. Like say I tilt this one down this way, right? That's going to cause this whole area, to kind of swing. This one's going to go like that, and this one's going to go like that. Right. And now this ligament here, this portion is going to be pulled upwards. This portion down here is going to get pulled downwards. Right. So what's going to happen? It's going to overtear. It's going to get overstretched and it's going to tear. And that's how ACL injuries happen. MCL injuries, they happen the exact opposite direction. If I were to pull, this up this way, and I were to pull this, this side over here down that way, that's going to overstretch the blue ligament. Right. It doesn't happen as often. We don't see MCL injuries quite as commonly, just because people don't usually move that way. And then the same thing is true for both of these MCL ligaments and LCL ligaments as well. And then just because we've got, some lovely artwork here, I'll put the meniscus in here as well. There's your.
Nice drawing, by the way.
Thanks. Good.
Actually, it came out pretty good.
It actually, I'm actually somewhat proud.
I wasn't bad at all when you're like, oh, my drawing skills aren't that
No,
good.
you don't understand. Like this happens.
Oh,
so
it's
well,
a great
but,
drawing.
He just got lucky this time around.
Yeah, seriously. My
Yeah,
friends,
this-
have you guys played those Jackbox games? The Jackbox where you play on your phone?
Oh yeah. Mhm.
I love those games, but the drawing ones, I'm just like, I can't.
Oh, those are the worst.
It's so bad. So those are, and then those would be your, both of these right here. Those are the, those are your menisci. So, it makes it look like it's angry menisci. So let's take a look back over here, right? So ACL tears, right? One of the most common sports related injuries often happens during there's two things that will often make this happen. It often involves like rotary action. So like a planting and a cutting, right? Again, like if I plant and I twist really, 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 really hard, and then like this anterior ligament here ends up tearing, super, super common there. And then the other one that'll often happen is like during hyperextension. So, you've got knee extension, right? If my knee sort of straightens out, just like elbow extension, right? So if I go from here to here, that's knee extension, right? But it will often happen during like hyperextension of that knee, where, basically when this comes like super far forward in the sagittal plane, this is located, it's running backwards, right? You can kind of see, it's a little hard to see in this because it's not really that 3D, but it is running forward, right? So if I were to hyperextend, that's going to pull the bones away and that's going to tear that, right? So those are your ACL injuries. Another one that's like somewhat common is MCL. So MCL is not the opposite of the PCL. Or I'm sorry, not the opposite of the ACL. This is where sometimes like when you're teaching these in order, right? It might seem like I'm gonna be like, well, you're gonna injure the ACL. Let's talk about how you injure the PCL because these two are kind of paired up. But we're actually doing this in NASM's got these slides set up in a different order. It's like going from most common to least common. So ACL is really, really common. The next one that's really, really common is your MCL ligament, your medial collateral ligament. I just realized, I think I spelled collateral wrong over here. Sure did, forgot my double L's. Quick reminder that I am not an English teacher. So you can see right here, that's your medial collateral ligament, right? It's on the medial side, it's on the inside, right? And so this happens. This is actually usually like a contact injury, especially in football. A lot of times it's very funny to me actually when I'll be watching like football. Is that a cockatoo I see in the background?
Yeah, it's my cockatoo.
What?
That's hilarious. Okay, got it.
It's been a
You
lot.
fly around or what? You let him fly around?
No, she can't fly, so she's a rescue. We got her from some lady, and yeah, so she's like growing her wings back out. So like she's like really needy.
That is awesome. Is she the yellow type or the pink type?
The yellow.
Oh, okay.
That's cool, dog. Taking care of a bird.
Yeah, that's right.
We had a pink one when I was growing up. We had the pink breast and stuff. The Moroccan cockatoos. And his name was Floyd because he was.
Yeah.
His name is Sophia.
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 That's great. Okay, focusing again. So MCL. So your MCL, this one honestly is usually a contact injury, but you can see here, if I were to like knock my leg this way, right? So if I got tackled like from the lower leg and my femur stayed straight up, and I were just to take this darn thing and just slam it from the inside and tear here, overstretch that, that's how that happens. Or more commonly in other times where someone will like fall on the ground and someone else will fall on this side, they'll like land on them over here, and then that causes overstretching here. So again, like we think of it as like overstretching from this direction down to that direction. We pull those two bones away from each other that way. That's going to cause the MCL tear. Same thing is true of the LCL tear. So that is often also a contact injury. Oh, actually, I guess they're not. We're gonna put these two together. Sorry, I thought it was going in that order. So next one we're gonna see is the PCL. Posterior cruciate ligament, really not injured that often. For two reasons. Number one, look at how freaking thick this thing is. It's way bigger than the other ones. So because of that, this one's not very commonly injured. Also, we don't see too many people like. This is just not the direction that most people are making like athletic twists because your other leg's in the way, just like when you think about like, let's say you're doing like you're playing sports and you're going to do a spin move, right? Like, you know, if you're going to do like exaggerated ranges of motion with this leg over here, it's got all the room in the world to move because there's no body parts in the way, right? Which is why, like, yeah, if you are going to spin, yeah, it's possible that like planting and cutting here could, you know, tear this thing because you can move really far. This leg over here, though, if it smacks into this leg, you end up backing off and taking the range of motion off. So it just doesn't happen all that often. You know, we don't see many people like do that just based on kind of the mechanics of our own bodies. Same thing is true of the Lcl ligament, the one running over here. This one's also really frequently uninjured for two reasons here. Number one, it's kind of already nice and long. So with that makes it like have a little bit more flexibility and mobility due to its length. And then also because of like the way, you know, I would have to have somebody smack me from like the inner thigh this way and overstretch this way, which if I'm going to get smacked like that, my other leg would be in the way, you know? So I'll much more likely get, you know, if I get tackled from the side, right, it's this leg that's going to get injured because which would end up protecting this one. So we don't really see it that often, either of these two. But that is how it would happen, right? If you were to basically like overstretch those ligaments. So those are the ligament tears in the knee. So other injuries that we can get. One is called patellar tendinopathy. I use this as an example when we were talking about how the knee is supposed to move. So if we just add a little bit to our chart here, one last little thing here, and I'm just going to kind of put this in like light gray. You have your kneecap, which kind of sits over top of this whole thing. That is going to be your patella. Okay, so there's your kneecap. That's the you know, your patella, or kneecap. So it kind of lives over top of all this, right? It kind of like sits there, and we'll talk about why that's so important here in a little bit. But that knee has to be able to, like, that kneecap needs to get out of the way when we're moving our knee through like different ranges of motion. So what's kind of funny is your patella actually moves this way. It actually moves superiorly whenever you are like flexing your knee. So when I bend my knee like this, if I go from like straight leg to bent leg, right, my patella actually slides around. It's moving through this range of motion. It goes superiorly and then it goes back, which means it needs to be able to kind of move in this like little groove that exists. And obviously you can't see that in my drawing here, but like there's a little groove to house the patella as it moves through here, right? So patellar tendinopathy, look at your patellar tendon, right? We see our quadriceps. This is your main quadricep muscle right here. It's called your rectus femoris. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But it runs down, it runs over top of the knee, and it inserts onto the shin right here. So that bone is embedded underneath that tendon right there. So what happens whenever tendons, you know, again, the example I was giving you is like if you rubbed your hands like this all day, it's gonna get freaking hot after a while, right? Like, right? Well, the same thing is happening with that connective tissue right here. So when that starts like, you know, moving in a way it's not supposed to move, your patella doesn't move the way it's supposed to, you'll get pain or stiffness or swelling along the knee, usually on the bottom portion. Usually it's like right down here underneath the kneecap. That's your jumper's knee. And luckily, it's honestly really easy to fix. This is this is an injury that I find, you know, it's the only tendonitis, in my opinion, that is actually somewhat easy to fix. It's just tight quads. So just stretch your quads out. I don't actually spend that much time stretching my clients' quads. I will do hip flexor stretches, but like, you know, remember this stretch right here from like basketball or recess or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the one they always teach you in gym. This freaking stretch is somewhat useless. Like it really, like these are muscles that are really mobile. Like I wish that they put more emphasis on like toe touching for hamstring stretches, but like this honestly doesn't serve much. I do really like a good, if I'm going to stretch out my quads, I do like a hip flexor stretch. This version here, That's a much better version because it serves a better purpose.
What about the one that they do in yoga where like you grab the back of your foot and then you kind of like launch forward? Is that a pretty good one for the
King Pigeon, I think.
It's like
This one right here. I mean, this is like the really extreme one.
What?
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily do that, but is that the one you're talking about?
No, it's the other one. It's the one where like you're here and then you move forward.
Oh, and you do the balance. Oh, that's like Warrior 3 or something. One of the warriors, I think. Yeah, that's a great stretch. I would say it is doing the quad thing, but it's a good hamstring stretch on the stance leg. But yeah, at least that version of that stretch is very functional. You know, you're doing it while you're like sort of stabilizing and stuff. So if I were gonna pick a quad stretch, I would, if I really wanted one, yeah, I would probably do that one. Just because it's like, I don't really care too much about quad stretches, but I do care a lot about balance. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do quads. In fact, if you have a client with jumper's knee, you should absolutely do quad stretches, you know, but 90% of your clients don't have this problem. So that's jumper's knee. We've also got IT band syndrome. This is something I struggle with sometimes. So IT band syndrome. So this is your IT band. Remember we talked about fascia earlier? You can see how we're drawing this in white. Your IT band for the most part is more fascia than it is muscle, honestly. And so it runs this portion here to here. We call that your TFL. That's your, you can see here, this is your tensor fascia latae, right? The TFL muscle. That's a hip muscle. So we're actually not going to talk about that today. But it does affect your knee very greatly because eventually it becomes fascia. And then that fascia runs down and connects out here. It's there to stabilize the outside of your knee, which is great. And we're really, you know, grateful for it. But like most fascia, it gets tighter very, very easily. Fascia, you can see we draw it in white, therefore it doesn't get very much blood flow. Therefore, it doesn't repair very quickly because it's just not getting as many nutrients delivered. This fascia often gets tightened up like crazy.
So that's why it hurts, huh? After like a leg day or something.
Yeah, right around the outside of the knee. And what that is, right? It feels like a rubbing sensation. It feels like tendonitis of the outside of your knee, right? So runner's knee and runner's hip, actually, they're both caused by like a tight IT band. It's this fascia rubbing along right here, you know, because it's going to basically run down and wrap around the outside like that, right? And so like if it rubs on this little knob right here, you know, it's going to get really like inflamed and feel very damaging. So often we call this runner's knee. It's iliotibial band syndrome. We call it runner's knee because it's way easier to say. And it's where the connective tissue rubs against the thigh bone, and that causes swelling and inflammation and pain and stuff. And then there's patellofemoral syndrome, which we're seeing here. Any version of this, you're going to have, this is the one that's kind of a pain in the butt because it's like, you need to look at how that freaking kneecap is moving. And so it takes a lot of you just like staring at your clients, just like fold it and bend it again. You know, you're just trying to like look at the knee and see, is the kneecap going this way or that way? It should go straight up. You know, it should travel up and down. It does a little bit of a tilt while it goes, but like it shouldn't be like, you know, like way over to the side. Or it shouldn't like move posteriorly in the wrong direction. So we look at what's called your patellar tracking, which is the sort of direction, you know, it's like you're tracking how the kneecap is moving. Ideally, it should move through the grooves the way it's supposed to. But one thing that you're going to learn today is you've got all of your quadriceps muscles. I want a colored one. Yes. So you can see here, thank you, Google. So you can see you got your three different, what are called your vasti muscles here. So that's your that's the lateral one. That's the vastus lateralis. There's the medial one. That's the vastus medialis. And then there's the in the middle one, which is your vastus intermedius, which I always say like an old guy from New York, like into the middle. That one right there, right? And then over top of the whole thing is that rectus femoris I mentioned earlier. And those are the 4 quad muscles. So 3 vasti, and then 1 that is also a hip flexor. So imagine if one of these gets tighter than the other. If the VMO here, if the vastus medialis gets overactive, what's going to happen? The kneecap's going to pull this way. If the vastus lateralis gets too overactive, what's it going to do? It's going to pull this way. So it's going to affect how that kneecap can move because it gets tight on one side and loose on the other. And that's what causes that patellofemoral syndrome, which is just where the cartilage underneath the knee is getting overworked because like it's grinding instead of like sliding the way it's supposed to. Let me show you what your patella should look like. Great video of this. Patellar. Yeah, there we go. So this is how it's supposed to kind of move in that groove, right? You can kind of see here. Ideally, it should be sliding around this, right? Like kind of goes back into its sort of resting position, but see how like there's the groove, right? It kind of looks like a freaking spaceship, and there should be an even amount of space throughout the whole thing. But what if I tied a muscle over to this side of it and pulled it diagonally to the right here? Well, the whole thing would grind to the right. Or if I pulled it to the left, it would grind to the left. Or if I pulled it down, right? So that's why tight quadricep muscles are also associated with that patellar jumper's knee, patellar tendinopathy, but also patellofemoral pain. All right, any questions on those injuries?
Hey, no questions.
Cool. I feel like the injury part is like my sales pitch. It's like, and now you need to know why.
Yeah. Would you say, like, how do you feel about running? A lot of people say like running, it causes a lot of injuries in your knees. Some people say it's healthy. Like, well, what do you feel like? Like, do you really think running excessively, like cross country, is like healthy for you?
Yeah. So I'm going to be biased here because I am a runner. So really quickly, just laying it out and saying like, I'm probably very biased. I think that we are designed to run. I think that like, if you look back through the centuries, you look at like, they call it evolutionary like anatomy, right? Started like in trees, and then we worked our way to the ground, and then we started like chasing other animals, right? The only way we're ever going to be able to do that is if we're able to run. And we are the fastest animal on the planet. Make no mistake about it. I know that doesn't sound accurate because you're like, the cheetah is the fastest animal. If you were me as a child. I was very pedantic as a kid. But like, you would say that. Yeah, you'd be right if you gave both like a cheetah and a human 30 seconds to run, 100%. Cheetah's going to be way faster. But if you gave us both 4 hours, we would cover more ground. We are the fastest land animal on the planet if we are given enough time. And if you look at the evolutionary pieces that we've had to be able to do that, we have these type 1 muscles that really have a lot of endurance, that are able to produce a lot of energy. We also have, like, we lost all of our body hair for the most part, unless you're like me, who still has a lot. But we lost all of our body hair, which has allowed us to sweat and vent heat, which means we can vent heat on the run. Other animals, like your dog, right? They have to like pant. That's the only way they can sweat. They vent heat through their mouth. We don't have to do that. Also, we have an extra bone up here in our neck that allows us to keep our head upright while we are running. Whereas most animals, you will notice if they are sprinting really hard, they'll kind of lock down. And so that keeps their jaw closed, which means they can't vent heat. So again, venting heat, right? And then we got this huge glute muscle that is just enormous. And that allows us to like, also propel ourselves very, very well. So then you look at all the bones and then the foot and stuff. I think we were literally designed to run. However, I think that if you do anything wrong, it will result in injury. And I think like if you look at like modern running shoes, again, I know I go on like a lot of rants about shoes and stuff, but if you look at like the way we've sort of like moved away from being a barefoot animal to being a like overcorrected, you know, we're letting our clothing do the work for us rather than letting our muscles, which we were born with, do the work for us to keep us like healthy and stuff. I think that it explains a lot of people's running injuries. Which is why like I retooled my running, you know, a little over 10 years ago, you know, from like being like a classic, what I thought was the right way to run, which was like heel to toe, heel to toe, heel to toe, to being like a toe striker, where I basically, my heels never touch the ground when I'm running. And like, you know, I've never had an ankle problem ever since. I do have a history of hamstring problems. So that's kind of, I can't say that I'm running injuryless, especially in the last year. I tore my hamstring pretty bad. But like, other than that, like that's the only running injury I've had. And I wouldn't say that's probably due to, you know, the running. I would say that's just due to me not stretching the way I should have.
Warming up.
Yeah.
Got it.
In the middle of a heavy deadlift program, and then I got through the whole thing. I literally,
It's all tight, huh?
dude, I literally finished my program and I went to go play ultimate the next day, which is like the start of my rest cycle. And it was literally like the first day, you know, the last day of the whole program. It was so frustrating. It's like a 12-week powerlifting thing, and then I blew it at the end. It's like literally falling at the finish line.
Yeah,
First time I've ever done that. So
that's all right. You know, you live and you learn, right?
hit my 30s, man. You hit
I know.
That's why I played smart, because I started training when I was fat. Have you guys seen me when I was big? At my biggest, I was like
You saw the
15.
photos, yeah.
The photos, yeah, I was super big, bro. I was nasty looking. But anyway, I was 27 at the time, and I was like, look, I gotta hire somebody, a mentor, a trainer, or something, because like I'm hitting my 30s. I don't got time for injuries. I don't got time for, you know, we're just getting older, and like the last thing you want to do is like be in debt with fucking you know, it's just like paying for like surgeries and shit like that. It's like, nah, I don't got time for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, played it smart.
It's a big change, man, right in the 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like the guy who like the way that he trained me just made me get inspired, and that's why I'm here.
Well, good story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That you know, keep that master telling that story to your clients. It'll
Yeah.
like it will be appreciated for sure.
For sure.
All right, so we actually don't have that many bones today. I mean, yesterday we had 26 like big bones, right? So today, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, 4 bones, piece of cake, you know. And that's really the entire list. So that's what we are sort of manipulating here. So if we pull it apart, right? If we're talking about the joints, you've got the main knee joint, which is where your femur, the biggest bone in your body, is interacting with your tibia, because that's actually where it says there is actually not a connection. You can see even the picture I drew, right? There's not actually a connection between my fibula and my femur. There is not a direct connection there. This actually lives underneath right here, right? Which is, again, I should have put this down here a little bit further, but that's where this lives, right? It lives underneath. So there's a joint between the fibula and the tibia, but there's not a joint between your fibula and your femur. But the big joints we're going to talk about, we've got your tibiofemoral joint. That's the proper knee joint, right? Tibia femoral. And then you get your patellofemoral, where your kneecap is interacting with your femur. Patello for patella, femoral for femur. And you know, you can see the little groove there. They kind of shaded it in the picture here. We're going to kind of like slide this up that groove, up and down. And then you've got your superior tibiofibular joint. Remember yesterday I mentioned how these two bones interact with each other twice. You know, if you look at them, they're actually about the same length, both of these bones, but because this one's situated a little bit lower, it kind of hangs down a little bit further, right? So there's a joint between where the fibula and the tibia interact, and there's another one where they interact down here as well. So this is your proximal tibiofibular joint, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the superior tibiofibular joint. And then there's the inferior or distal tibiofibular joint. So that there's technically two of those, you know, and again, there's the fascia in between, right? That kind of holds those two bones together. So those are all the joints in the knee there, right? Now, like I said, there are some other pieces of connective tissue in here because this joint is so big and it is dealing with just like a lot of impact every day. Because of that, it's got some specialized materials in here. So if we look at this, you can see, you know, we got the meniscuses, right? The menisci, that's pretty special, right? And then look at all these like little, like these little like pockets, these little sacs. Those are actually filled with fluid. Those are called your bursa. Think of them as liquid packing peanuts, you know? They're in there to kind of just keep everything, you know, from experiencing too much impact, right? And so those are your bursa, right? You can, by the way, in the same way that you can get tendinitis, you can get what's called bursitis, where if you actually rupture one of these sacs, if you tear them, or if they just get like inflamed, the bursa just, it gets like, in your body basically just puts inflammation until it can repair that sac. So that's bursitis, which sounds like burstitis, which actually is a pretty good visual because that's kind of what happened. So there's the bursa, and then you see this like a little yellow section here. That's actually a fat pad, and that fat pad is also there to kind of you know, prevent too much rubbing on the patellar tendon, right? It's kind of there to protect the tendon as it's running down here from like this connected. So there's a little bit of bursa, there's a little bit of fat pad there, and that way that tendon doesn't rub on this right here. But again, it still does sometimes, you know. Jumper's knee, patellofemoral. So that is that's all the special stuff that's in the knee. So, all right, let's talk about how the knee is supposed to move, right? So I already showed you a little bit of like how the patella is supposed to move, but we also, you know, what's so bad about knees caving in, right? Well, or how do we determine if someone's knee's caving in? Maybe that's just what their posture looks like. It isn't, but maybe that's what somebody would say, right? Like, well, we base it on what's called their Q angle. And there is a difference between men and women's Q angles. Women have a wider pelvis. Therefore, like it has to be a little bit more of intense of an angle. But what we're seeing all the time are people who are standing like this, right? We're seeing this like major caving in action, right? So if you were to like draw an angle from my hip here down to my knee, it's going to travel further than if my knees were stacked directly under my hip the way it's supposed to, right? That's what your Q angle is. So the way we get our Q angle, and you guys aren't going to have to measure this, but you want to get familiar with what it's supposed to look like just visually. This is where, you know, we had that, remember that goniometer, that little tool that we use to like measure the actual angle of stuff. If you want to get super specific, like you're in like a physical therapy setting and you want to like track progress with your client, you would measure their Q angle using that and be like, all right, your Q angle is at like 28 degrees. That would be really extreme. And so then like you work with them, you're working on their muscles, you know, you're massaging, you're stretching, you're strengthening, you're doing all these things. And then like 4 weeks later, it's like, let's check your Q angle. It's like, it was at 28. Oh, now it's down to 22. Still outside normal ranges, but we're getting better, right? And so you can track progress that way. Or you can take pictures, which is what I like to do. I can take a photo of my client's knees and then track it over time.
I did it on my own, but you know, I don't have clients yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I have so many dumb just album after album on my phone. I gotta get them off my phone. It's taking up all my space. This is like this phone's like 6 years old, so it's like it does not deal well at this point. So how do we measure the angle? What is it from? Well, we've got a right angle here. We got just like a straight, you know, 90-degree line. And we are comparing it to where the ASIS, that is the bone here on the front of your pelvis, right? That really hard bone. That, if we talk about your pelvis, this is the ASIS, that's anterior because it's in the front, superior because it is above the, for the most part, of the rest of the pelvis. Iliac, this ridge here is called your ilium, spine, and it's along the spine of it, right? So that's the ASIS. You also have your PSIS back here, posterior superior iliac spine. So we'll talk about those tomorrow. But if you draw a line from your ASIS all the way down to the center of your kneecap, ideally, the difference here, if you were to measure this angle, it should be 15 degrees or less if you are a man, because your pelvis is a little bit more narrow. If your pelvis was wider, obviously that angle, let's say the pelvis came out to here, right? That would maybe be 20 degrees or less if you're female. If it is greater than that, right? If you bring the knee really far in this way, you're going to have an increased Q angle, and it's going to look like this. Right, so this is an increased Q angle. Now see what's happening in the knee here. So because this angle is so intense, right? Let's say this is a man. Actually, I really can't tell with the drawing. I don't know. We'll say it's a male pelvis. It's kind of a wide sacrum for a man, but the pelvis is also not that wide. So now this drawing is that sacrum is way too big. Anyway, so let's say this is a man's pelvis, right? So this should be 15 degrees or less, right? So let's say this is 20 degrees right here. That's 5 degrees higher than it should be. You can see if I drew like a right angle here, right? If I were to measure the difference between these two, look at how this side is collapsed in, and then this side is gaping, right? You can understand how that's going to cause problems, right? Which are you really likely to injure? The MCL ligament, right? You're really likely to overstretch that. Also, look, your ACL is going to run from here to here, and you are pulling the bones apart. So what are our two most common knee injuries? ACL and MCL tears, right? Versus our LCL, PCL tears. Those don't happen as often because it's not stretching. We don't see it get into those positions. So a higher Q angle usually predisposes people for injuries. Now, here's the other part of it, right? That's putting stress down, and that's screwing up my ankle's angle. And now my foot is going to try to compensate by turning out and by everting. And now all of a sudden we're seeing pronation distortion. So which came first, the Q angle or the pronation of the ankle, right? Was it the knee or was it the ankle? I don't know. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Same thing, doesn't really matter. What matters is the fact that they're associated with one another, right? I don't know what was caused first, whether it was like the hip stuff that caused the ankle stuff, or it was the ankle stuff that caused the knee stuff. Or the hip stuff, and that's the other thing, right? Like, look up here. What's that affecting? This whole thing is screwing up our hip joint now. And what's that going to affect? It's going to affect the low joint, so the low back. So again, all of these are connected, and the knee is kind of stuck in the middle. So I actually don't necessarily think, which came first. Probably actually one of the others. Probably like the hip because it's bigger, or probably the ankle because it's the foundation. But the knee's trapped in the middle anyways, so we got to fix it. And sometimes you'll see the exact opposites. You will also see a decreased Q angle, which is also bad. So your Q angle, sometimes you'll see like the bow-legged posture. That's also not good. Somebody who's like, they call it not like bow-legged, right? So again, normally we want it about 15 degrees. We see the excessive pronation of the ankle, which causes like the knees to cave in. That's knock-kneed. That's an increased Q angle. And then you'll sometimes see people whose like legs go out. That's bow-legged. That's also not good. We don't want to decrease our Q angle too much. Let me find a picture.
Aren't people just born that way too? Like
some people, yeah, absolutely. Like make no mistake. Like sometimes you can be born that way. But oftentimes it's through posture. You know, I'll sometimes see it in like kids who will do sports at really young ages. Sometimes have the bow-legged thing because they get so much time doing like sitting into like a squat and doing like lateral movement. And when lateral movement's like pulling the knees this way, it's the very rare instance where somebody does have an overactive glute muscle. So many of our clients, we need to turn their glutes on just all the time. Occasionally you'll run into the client who has like overly developed, and it's never their gluteus maximus, it's always their gluteus medius, which is the abductor muscle. So sometimes you'll see that, but it's not even mentioned in your regular textbook because of how rare it is. It'll be in corrective exercise. We're going to talk about it, but it's not even in your regular book. The knees cave out, it only shows up in corrective. That's, you know, how rare it is. I haven't worked with somebody. I've seen students. We run into it at Sochi a little bit more than you run into it in the regular world. Because again, a lot of us are athletes and stuff. We have a lot of people who played sports growing up. So we'll see like the bow-legged a little bit more often than like you would in a regular gym. But I can't even, last bow-legged client I had was like years ago. So there you go, right? Here's ideal in the middle, right? There's an even amount of space here. There's a decreased Q angle, right? So that's, you see how it's like pretty much 90 degrees, right? That's like, let's say 0 degrees, right? That's really bad. And there's just a huge gap right here. This is the type of client who, yeah, they might tear their LCL instead of their MCL. They might tear their posterior ligament instead of their ACL. Probably not, but still it could. And then here's what we generally see, the knees caving in posture. That's so very, very, very common. And that's gapping on this side. So both are bad, right? Both are things that we are trying to avoid. And those have terms, by the way. These are terms I want you guys to get super familiar with and use this interchangeably all the time. So normal Q angle, 15 degrees or less for women. 15 degrees or less for men, 20 degrees or less for women. With a higher, women have a naturally higher Q angle because they have a naturally wider pelvis than we do. If you're increasing your Q angle, if the angle is greater than it's supposed to be and your knees are caving in, we call that knee valgus. Okay, I'm going to try to use that term more through the rest of today's lesson just so we get familiar with it. But knees caving in is known as knee valgus. Okay, and knees caving out is known as knee varus. So you get the knock knees, that's the valgus. You got the bow-legged, that's the varus. Okay, I don't really know where those words came from. I wish I could tell you the origin of them. But there we go, right? So Thomas, you'll remember this video. I'm going to show this video next mod more in depth, but there's a test that we sometimes do for athletes called the LESS test. It's the landing error scoring test. And this person here did a really great video on it. And you can tell she's using her son actually to do it. And you can see if you look at him as he lands, you know, he's going to get some points deducted because this is a posture assessment. It's an explosive posture assessment. I wouldn't give him a very good score. I would say like, hey, we got some overactive muscles that are causing this knee valgus. And you'll see what I mean right here. Let's play this again in slow motion. Let's take him up onto the box. Pause that. Settings, playback speed, quarter speed. Okay, watch this. So he's going to jump already, knees cave in, right? He squeezes inner thighs. Why'd that happen? Well, his adductors, his inner thighs, are doing more work than his abductors, his medial glute. And then probably, you know, there's just a little bit of squeezing and probably the TFL too. And maybe a tight calf muscle on the lateral side. And then he's going to jump. He's going to land and see all the wobbling. Same thing. They caved in again before he went up. So he's not using his quad, and then again, they cave in the middle. So he's not using his quadriceps the way he's supposed to. He's not using his glutes the way he's supposed to. And so the other muscles are sort of contracting when they're not supposed to. His body found a way to get the job done, but not really the way it's intended. Question.
How would you solve that problem with him?
Same way we would solve literally every problem we ever come across. I would stretch the overactive stuff to turn it off, and I would strengthen the underactive stuff to turn it on. In that case, what needs to be turned off and what's turned on is mostly up here at the hip. His TFL, that one that causes the runner's knee, that muscle's really tight, so I need to stretch that. That muscle is a hip flexor and a hip internal rotator. So I would extend and externally rotate and stretch away. And that would turn it off. Also, his adductors, his inner thighs. So we would do like an inner thigh stretch, either there or the one we did in the gym where we do this, right? Both of those are going to stretch like, you know, my groin and my inner thigh.
That's what we did.
And that would turn them all off. And then I would do a lot of stuff like this, a lot of like leg raises, the band around the knees, right? Maybe like a side lying leg raise, all the stuff, and then lots of squats. And every time I'm watching him on squats, I'm like, push the knees out, push the knees out, you know.
For example, you would turn on his glutes.
Yep.
Stretch all kind of like the muscles on the side, correct?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it.
So there we go. But today we're talking about the knees. So let's go. That's so awesome. So let's take a look here, right? So we're gonna start in the back of the thigh with the hamstrings. So hamstrings, you're gonna see two groups of two muscles, but one thing that's really annoying, drives me crazy. How many muscles are in your hamstrings? Officially, we will say 3, but there are going to be 4 things you need to memorize because one muscle has 2 separate fibers. Dumb. So, not the way it's designed, just the way we chose to label it. But I mean, it is officially one muscle, but it's like, you know, I've seen that test question there before. They'll say like, of the 3 hamstring muscles, and people are like 3, and they know they have got like 4 things rattling around up here. So let's talk about that first one, the lateral hamstring muscle, right? So the lateral hamstring muscle, this is going to be your biceps femoris, and it's going to be your long head. Okay, so the long head of the biceps femoris runs back here. You can see it. It runs from the pelvis down around, it's the lateral side, so around the outside portion of the thigh there. And then it's going to grab onto the fibula right here. So just like any other hamstring muscle, it's going to do knee flexion, right? So it's in charge of that knee flexion. It's flexing my knee up like this. But because it's on the lateral side, right, it's going to do a little bit of rotational movement as well towards the outside, right? We'll talk about that in just a second. So, but here's the other thing. It's also attached to my hip. So we're going to end up talking about this muscle twice over the next 2 days. We're going to talk about it today when we're talking about knee flexion. Tomorrow, we're doing the lumbopelvic hip complex. So it also assists during hip extension. So the 2 things my hamstring muscles do, right? One is what we usually think of, which is this, but it also assists in that, right? Now that's mostly my glute, but yes, my hamstrings are, or even like coming out of a squat, right? If I'm coming here, my hamstring's doing a little bit of work to pull me up, but it shouldn't be doing too much work. It should do some work, but the main one should be your glute. So if we're labeling this, the action, again, we always start every sentence with concentric, because that's the shortening, and that is going to cause acceleration. So it concentrically accelerates. And then the things that it does are knee flexion and hip extension. And the one other thing that it does, see how it's connected to the fibula here? It does tibial external rotation. So I want everybody to kind of feel this. You can take your hand behind the back of your thigh. So here's the thing, your knee, if I straighten my leg out, I told you to twist from the below the knee down, you can't do it. With your patella in place, it's impossible to twist your knee. Can't be done. Patella's locking the knee joint. But if you bend the knee joint to about 30 degrees of flexion or more, now suddenly I can twist from the knee down. I don't have to move my thigh at all. So hand behind the back of the thigh. on the lateral side, not on the medial side, on the lateral side, and then twist your knee. You will feel that contract right here. Feel that? So that's the same thing. That's the same arrangement there as what's happening in your biceps. It's the exact same arrangement here. I gotta get rid of this so you guys can see. So my bicep, right? If I go here, right, and then I twist. See how it's contracting? Right? Same thing is happening back here when I twist. So that is, and that's why, by the way.
I feel it too.
Yeah, you can feel it, right? Yeah. So that's what we're seeing there, right? We're seeing the biceps femoris. So it does tibial external rotation. So now, and if you want to do this, you can, it's a pain in the butt to try to balance, but if we think about like, if I go here and then I turn my foot away, now I'm going to keep this angle. I'm going to swing it through to the front here. Look at what's happened, right, to my foot. It's in that almost pronation distortion. So if I were to like bring this down to the ground, what would my squat look like? It would look like this, right? In relation to everything else, if I go here, this is that external tibial rotation. So which muscles are overactive with that kid who was jumping earlier? I said TFL is overactive. It's too tight. It's causing the hip to turn in, right? I'd say maybe the calf externally. I would also say this muscle right here. That's a tight muscle. It's overactive. It's doing more work than it's supposed to. Yeah, it's his adductors for sure. But it is also, this is what's causing the rotary movement in that leg. Now, you've also got the biceps femoris short head. Almost exactly the same thing. You notice how the words aren't changing too much, right? The only difference is this one actually starts in the middle of the femur. It doesn't start at the, it's not attached to the pelvis. It inserts in the same spot. They both insert here on the back of the fibula, right? See the fibula there? Fibula there, right? Same insertion spot. But notice how the origin up here is at the hip. This origin's on the femur. So because of that, it can't affect your hip. It can only do knee stuff. So they both do knee flexion and they both do tibial external rotation, but the long head can assist with hip extension and the short head cannot. This one right here is the one that's overactive most times. The short head, because it only has one job, it's like really good at that job and just refuses to like let go. This muscle is often the big bad for a lot of our clients. If you look at like our overactive, underactive muscles lists that are in your textbook, you'll see biceps femoris short head just all the time. It's just on every list, like overactive, overactive, overactive. It's on all of them practically. I mean, obviously it's not in the shoulder stuff, but I don't know, there's probably some cause there. I hate this muscle. This is the devil's muscle. And it's just really overactive on a lot of our clients. So this is why when you think about the fact that it does, you know, that external rotation of the knee, like foot, right? So how, if I wanted to stretch this, what do I need to do? I need to internally rotate it. And then because it's a hamstring muscle, it's in charge of knee flexion. What do I need to do? I need to do knee extension. So how we stretch this, and this is a very weird looking hamstring stretch. I'm going to kind of go at an angle here so you guys can see. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this so you can really, really see. There you go. So if I go like this and I take my leg up on a bench like that and my hips are square, it's pretty good. But if I really want to, you know, remember it does rotation like this. So if I want to take the stretch off, all I got to do is open up my hip. I no longer feel it back here. Therefore, if I cross myself this way, I will feel it along the backside portion, which is why the version we like to do is this. When we do that, that's stretching here, right? So again, and why? It's because it's in charge of normally going this way. So that's when it's shortened. So I stretch it by going across my body that way. And because it is a hamstring muscle, I also need to have my leg straight. I have to have it in extension instead of flexion. So again, like our whole job, right, is looking at what the muscle does. And if I want to stretch it, I'm going to do the opposite. If I want to strengthen it, I'm going to do it. You know, like I'm going to do the muscles action if I'm trying to strengthen it. I'm going to do the opposite of the muscles action if I'm trying to stretch it. That's why we got to be aware of these opposites, right? We want the yin to our yang, yin to our yang, right? We want to up to our down, our black to our white, our left to our right. We're constantly just working in opposites. We like both the Joker and Batman. So those are your two biceps. That's the lateral hamstring. Both of these are the lateral side. Then you got the medial side. And that's going to be two hamstring muscles as well. And they're identical. Take a look here. See my list? I'm going to flip back and forth between these slides. The picture changes. The text does not. Medial hamstring, both muscles do exactly the same thing. There's no short head or long head in the medial, but that's called your semimembranosus. That's this one right here. It's the slightly thicker of the two. And then you've got your semitendinosus. The membranosus is, you'll notice it's a little bit higher up on this little notch in the back here. And then it grabs here. And then the tendinosus, it grabs in the same spot, but it's just a little bit lower down. And it just gives you a little bit of a thicker hamstring muscle so that both those don't have to work too hard. This, by the way, I told you guys I ruptured my hamstring earlier this year. It was my medial fibers because my lateral fibers got tight and then refused to contract. And so they left the medial fibers to do all the work and it couldn't keep up. Which is another reason why it's so important to pay attention to that. I probably was developing knee valgus from lifting too heavy over the 12 weeks. That was probably what was happening. I was probably letting my knees cave in when I shouldn't have, and didn't notice it because I don't have a mirror in the back of my freaking in my home gym. I build everything, but I don't have mirrors. All right, so that's the hamstrings. Any questions on the hamstrings?
No.
Cool.
Good.
Let's flip to the other side of the thigh. Let's go to the quads. So quad 4. Not that, I mean, we had 4 in the hamstring as well. But these are going to be 3 vasti muscles and 1 hip flexor that is your rectus femoris. So of the vasti muscles, watch this. Look at the text. Boom, boom, boom. None of them are different in your book, at least. I will say I have a slight disagreement here. The lateralis and the medialis, you know, the lateral side here and the medial side here. Remember earlier I mentioned that poor patellar tracking. If one of them gets tight and one of them gets loose, it will cause the patella to kind of, glide in the wrong direction. Usually it's the lateralis, right? Lateralis likes to get tight. This lateral quad muscle really likes to get tight, which starts to make a lot of sense when I mentioned earlier the TFL, which you can see around the outside here, that also likes to get tight. And then remember the lateral hamstring muscle likes to get tight. It's all the stuff around the outside. It all shares, we call it a common fascia. And so all that webbing is kind of keeping those muscles all like together. All 3 of those are often like, if you do have a tight quad muscle, it's usually the outside one. Most people don't. Most people, it's like a hip problem, which is a quad muscle. But usually if you need a little bit of like quad massage, it's usually like right along the outside, and we usually need to strengthen this inner quad muscle, the teardrop one, right? That's your VMO, that's your vastus medialis. So oftentimes, like when somebody has like an increased Q angle, it's sometimes like a tight muscle here. That's your vastus lateralis. And again, let's look at the name, look at the words here. Concentrically accelerates knee extension. That's all it does. It's not attached to the hip, right? None of the vasti muscles are. The 3 vastus muscles do not connect at the hip. They only connect at the femur and then down. This kind of makes it look like they're grabbing the kneecap here, but it grabs all the way down, right? So those are your 3 vasti muscles. Lateralis, medialis in the middleus, intermedius, right? So all three of them concentrically accelerate knee extension, and then that would be eccentrically decelerating during like knee flexion, right? So how do we, which means if I want to stretch them, yeah, I do knee flexion. And there we go, right? But like I said, those muscles are not the bad guys oftentimes. Those are the muscles that are not really all that often that tight. Now you'll notice I've switched to hip musculature, but we have one more quad muscle left. We only did 3, right? So this is where we're going to mention this muscle again tomorrow. This muscle shows up on our hip list for sure. And that's your rectus femoris, okay? Rectus femoris. This lives on top of the other 3. So this is the most superficial, right? In fact, you can still see the VMO right here. You can still see well, actually they didn't draw them. Well, yeah, you can kind of see it behind. Lateralis would be there. But the intermedius is kind of hidden underneath the rectus whenever we draw it. It's always hard to see. Let me see if I can find a picture here. All 4 quad muscles colored. Find that works. Ooh, hey, very interactive. Yeah. So yeah, you can see over top. Actually, I kind of don't want it to move. Actually. So medialis in the middle, lateralis on the outside, and then they're kind of like putting these two together. But yeah, like the rectus femoris is living over top of these. So here's the thing. Notice how it runs all the way up here to the pelvis, right? Look at the other ones. They start on the femur, right? They start down here on the femur bone. But your rectus femoris, which is your main quad muscle, runs all the way to the hip. And therefore, it is going to do the knee stuff, but it's also going to do the hip stuff. Just like, remember the long head of our hamstring, the long head biceps femoris, it does hip extension. The semimembranosus, semitendinosus, they do hip extension as well. Like those 3 hamstring muscles, yeah, they're primarily knee flexors, but they also do hip extension because they are attached to the hip. But the biceps femoris short head is only a knee extensor. It's not attached to the hip. Well, the 3 vastus muscles don't attach to the hip. Therefore, they can only do knee extension. But the rectus femoris does knee extension and hip flexion. So it's a hip flexor. So it's attached right here on the knob that I keep mentioning, right? And then it runs down over top of the kneecap here. So it is in charge of this. It is still a quad muscle, but it also does this. So that's knee extension and hip flexion, right? So there it is, right? That's what it says here in the action. Concentrically accelerates knee extension and hip flexion. So we're going to talk about the hip flexion tomorrow, but today we're talking about the knee extension, right? This is of the quad muscles. This is the one we want to stretch. So that's why I said I'm not a big fan of this stretch personally, but I do love this stretch, which is more of like taking my hip into hip extension, right? Here, my hip is stacked. It's not extended at all. It's really just in a neutral position, right? So if I go forward like this, right, and I keep my pelvis upright, this is now going into extension, and I'll feel it right here. I feel it right at the top. That's my rectus femoris getting stretched. I want to make it even more, I can take my arm up, right? If I want to make it even more, I can do a little bit of both. And now I'm doing knee extension. I'm sorry, now I'm doing knee flexion, which is stretching my rectus femoris one way. And I'm doing hip extension, which is stretching my rectus femoris the other way. So it's getting stretched in 2 ways simultaneously. That's my favorite quad stretch.
I actually do that too.
Yeah, it's a good one, right?
I like
that. I often don't do it where I grab it. I usually like put my foot on a bench.
on the wall. Yeah, or a bench.
Or the wall, yeah. Way easier.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm like,
falling down.
But yeah, so those are the quad muscles. Questions, comments, concerns? Feeling good?
Good.
No, all good.
Cool. By the way, that's also the big one. Remember I talked about lower cross syndrome? That's what we're going to talk about next time we meet, right? We see this,
Oh yeah.
right? The rectus femoris is the big one that's doing this. It's pulling down tight, and it's working with the low back to do it.
Well, the Instagram models be doing that.
Instagram booty. Yep. All right. So the last two we got to talk about, which are also kind of hip muscles. These are going to be on our list tomorrow again. Your hip muscles we've got are your gracilis and your sartorius. Your gracilis is this little tiny one. Here's the thing. Notice how most of what it does is hip adduction. So it actually works as an adductor, hip flexion, and hip internal rotation. So we're seeing like, man, that's a lot of hip stuff. Why the heck are we talking about the gracilis? Well, it does connect down here at the tibia. So it does tibial internal rotation. Therefore, it works opposite of that tibial external rotation we talked about earlier. That biceps femoris long head and that biceps femoris short head, they're kind of the opposite of the gracilis. So it's a knee, it's there to create stability in the knee. That's why we're talking about it today. So how do you activate that? Well, generally it would be just really focusing on like a lot of stability movement and driving the knees outward. So again, making sure that you're not letting that knee valgus happen. Like, you know, let's say I'm doing like prisoner squats, right? I'm not squatting like this, right? My gracilis doesn't get to do what it needs to do. I would want to make sure I'm learning how to stabilize my knees. So I would drive my knees out as I squat down, creating that external rotation instead of internal rotation. So I don't want my knees to cave in. I don't want them to overly cave out either. But usually, like I said earlier, we don't really see that problem as often. We've also got your sartorius. That's also a knee stabilizer. This is the longest muscle in your body, by the way. Just a fun little factoid. Runs all the way from the pelvis, same spot as the rectus femoris did earlier, right? But it runs from there across and down and grabs the inside of the knee. So again, this is mostly a hip flexor. That's what it's famous for. It's mostly an external rotator. It's mostly an abductor, right? It's doing a lot of hip stuff, but it is there to help with a little bit of knee flexion. It actually kind of assists the hamstrings there, and a little bit of internal rotation working opposite the lateral hamstring muscles. So again, we want to work on using our gracilis and our sartorius to stabilize. So how the heck do you strengthen them? Honestly, the best thing you can do is just all that wobbly stuff. All those weird Joel Seedman exercises we saw where somebody's like, you know, doing like a, you know, stabilizing like, you know, single leg squat. You know, I'm kind of like exaggerating the wiggliness here, but like, you know, when they're doing all that, think about like all the little tiny contractions that it's getting, right? As I'm like moving, and then eventually they get good at it. And it's like, you know, down and up, and you shouldn't tilt like that like I did.
It's like those exercises that they do like on the half ball, right?
The Bosu, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the half ball called?
A Bosu ball.
Bosu ball.
Yeah. They're like $80. Keep them in your car. They're great. Get one. I mean, don't keep it in your car, but like, I'm a big fan. I got one in my closet downstairs. And that's like my favorite thing to use whenever I'm doing like rehab stuff, you know?
But it's like, it's made out of like all plastic. It's not like soft on the bottom. It's all hard.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, it's flat, hard on top and then soft on the bottom.
Yeah, but mine is like,
oh, yours. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, my auntie gave it to me.
I do have a what's called a wobble board.
Yeah.
As well.
It might actually.
Yeah, those are hard on all sides.
Yeah, wobble board.
Yeah, they look like this.
But it does kind of, it's like the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are also really good. I like these. I like these because they're smaller. I have two of these, and I love to do like one ankle on, you know, 1 foot on one on the other.
Yeah. No way, dude. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's just those muscles, right? In the front, in the quads.
Yeah, because you get all that like stabilizing, right? So then your gracilis and your sartorius are learning how to like stabilize. You're teaching your nervous system. You know, that's what balance stuff is, right? Like break this down a little bit, right? Let's say I'm standing on one leg and I lose my balance and I tilt over here, right? Well, now if I want to get back to here, right? I just taught my brain how much force it needs to contract in all these places. I just taught it how much it needs to get back to here. Because it's going to test it out, right? It's going to say, okay, let's try this much. And I fall back down. It's like, whoop, not enough, right? But then, whoop, too much. Oh, just right, you know? It's Goldilocks. That's how we learn our balance, right? We're giving our brain data, you know? Just like when you were a kid, like, you know, learning the alphabet. It's like, oh, those two letters together make this sound. You're like, oh, okay. You start to put it together and then you see it again and you're like, there, right? Unless it's English, in which case there's all these broken rules. All right, so so we went one direction. Let's go ahead and flip it in case that's the type of memorizer you are. Maybe you don't go from muscle to movement. Maybe instead you go from movement to muscle. So our movements, we've got our flexion and extension, and then tibial external rotation and tibial internal rotation. And this can't happen unless you flex your foot to about 30 degrees. Then it'll, or I'm sorry, flex your knee to about 30 degrees. It unlocks the patella and allows those rotational movements to happen. So really only four movements today, right? Flexion, extension, external and internal rotation. That's it. So that's why our list is, you know, what does the extension? It's going to be the three vasti muscles. See how, again, they start on the femur in all three versions. There's the lateral one, the vastus lateralis. There's the medial one. That's the vastus medialis, oblique, or VMO is what everybody will call it. And then there's the vastus in the middleus, intermedius, right? And all three of those are your vasti muscles. And then there's the main quadricep, which is your rectus femoris, and it runs all the way up and starts at the hip. So that's why this does, you know, the only thing that these three do is knee extension. That's it. But this one, because it's all the way up here and then runs down, that's knee extension as well, plus hip flexion. So that's both. And those are your four quad muscles. Then we get your hamstring muscles, of which there are three, although you got to memorize four things because you get the long head and the short head. You can see this is the two medial ones, your medial hamstring muscles. That's your semimembranosus and your semitendinosus. And then over here, you've got your two lateral hamstring. I mean, you get your one lateral hamstring muscle in two parts. And that's your biceps femoris long head, which is running all the way up. And then you get your short head, which starts in the middle of the femur. Both of them run to the same spot, but one's going to the middle and one's going all the way up to the hip. So the membranosus, tendinosus, and long head can all also do hip extension, but all of them do knee flexion. But those three can also do a little bit of hip extension. And then the short head can only do the hip or the knee flexion. And then if we look at where they're attached, we go to our rotation movements. Well, you've got the knee internal rotation, which is the medial hamstring muscles, right? Both of these two running to the inside. Therefore, they rotate. If I go here, they rotate this way. That's my medial hamstring. And then we got the lateral hamstring, which rotates this way. And that's why, again, when we see pronation distortion syndrome. So we see the biceps femoris muscles, both long head and short head. There is one little extra one, by the way, that NASM doesn't ever talk about. It's called your popliteus. It's this little tiny little knee stabilizer. Doesn't really do any concentric shortening for the most part. It's just there to add stability. So you'll end up working your popliteus whenever you do knee stabilization stuff. So that's the internal rotators, right? And then there's the external rotators. And that is the entire knee. So, like I said, you're going to see that increased Q angle, right? Or if we look at, let's look at pronation distortion syndrome. So this is where we take our problems from yesterday and we put them together with our problems from today. And we end up with the whole thing, right? It is knee valgus and externally rotated feet. So the feet are pronating and the knees are caving in. So if we're starting to put this together, this is why if you look at pronation distortion syndrome, overactive and underactive muscles, when you look at the list, you can work it from both sides. Ooh, is that gonna, how high is the quality on this? Yeah, that's not gonna work. It's also not gonna work. Come on, give me, come on, internet, help me out. I know it's out there. Close. You know what? Oh God, it's so close. I keep finding like, there we go. All right, this will work. It's not ideal, but I would love to have a chart where they're side by side. So we see characterized by, again, flattened or externally rotated feet, adducted internally rotated knees. So the tight muscles. It says gastrocnemius and soleus. I would say, if I was being a little bit more specific personally, I would say lateral gastrocnemius, right? We talked about that yesterday. That's what's externally rotating the foot away. Peroneals, that's what's everting the foot. Adductors, that's what's driving the hip in. We'll talk about hip stuff tomorrow. IT band, which is around the outside of the back here, right? That is that lateral muscle that causes that, working with the biceps femoris to do that external tibial rotation, which in relation here, right? See how this is on the outside, the foot turning the opposite way. And then we see biceps femoris short head, right? That biceps femoris muscle around the outside. So both of those, that's pulled the knee out, right? So again, now I've got somebody who's doing this, and that's what we're seeing in the picture, right? Look at both my feet. I look like the photo, right? Those are all of our tight muscles. Those are the ones we need to stretch. So how do we stretch them? We look at what their action is. We do the opposite. If the biceps femoris wants to go this way, I will stretch it by going this way. If it wants to do knee flexion, which is what the biceps femoris does, I will do knee extension, right? So those are the tight muscles. And then we just flip to the other side of the joint, right? Instead of the gastrocnemius, we flip to the other side and we strengthen the anterior and posterior tibialis. Talked about that yesterday. Instead of working on that biceps femoris, which is back here, that's lateral and posterior. Well, then I'm going to go anterior and medial. That's my VMO, my vastus medialis. This is the quad muscle here at the teardrop one. And then I'm going to work on my gluteus maximus. That's hip stuff that's working against the adductors. And then gluteus medius. We'll talk about those tomorrow with hip stuff, but yeah, that is that's how we do it. That's why those are the muscles on the list there. And that's it today, guys. How are you feeling?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Flashcard City population, you guys?
Oh, I need to get those.
Bro. Just go to Walmart or Target. They come in like 100 packs.
Ooh, there is that. Yeah. Honestly, dude, go to the dollar store.
Yeah, it costs like less.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent so much time in Dollar Tree when I was in college.
Oh yeah. That's good. That's smart. Super smart, man.
Oh, Hector, you're muted.
Sorry. It's on Canvas, right? Like the thing that you want us to, and it's the muscles, like all the muscles that we're talking about right now.
I also put it in yesterday's email.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's got every muscle in your book. And then Mir, you were talking about Appendix B, right?
Appendix D.
D.
I think maybe the D stands for diagrams.
Ha! There we go.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's all the way
in the back of your book.
Starts at page 623.
There we go. So yeah,
Yeah.
you'll find all the muscles listed there.
Got it. Cool. So all we have to do is take a picture and send it to you through text?
Yeah, I don't need you to send. I had one student, I felt so bad. They like individually, like to prove, and I was like, oh
no.
God, I was like, no, just.
You're gonna take up a lot of memory on your phone.
Yeah, I was like, I felt so bad. I just like was sitting there one day, and then like all of a sudden my phone was like, bum 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 bum, and I was like, what? And then I like literally was like, stop, and I like.
Wait. What did he do? He took pictures of what?
He took 60 photos. And sent me one of each.
But what are the photos of?
Of every flashcard.
Oh, what a guy.
Not what I meant. Just put them on your nightstand, put them on your, and just spread them and take one photo. Like I don't need the details. I trust that you didn't go through all the effort of making fake flashcards to fool me. Like I don't think anyone's gonna do that. Like,
you don't have homework tonight, right? Till tomorrow?
Yeah, today's the day. Yeah, day 8 today. Ugh.
Okay, so wait. We're supposed to take. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
we're supposed to make flashcards of.
It's not homework. Remember, this is extra credit.
Okay.
It's to make up for any absences. Some of you guys have not missed any days, but like, Actor, let's get one. Let's get these flashcards. Back to 100%. Yeah. It's meant to be used as attendance credit. It makes up for a missed day of class.
All right. Yeah.
In that case, I'm gonna plan out a trip to Disneyland.
Yeah.
Hey, take me with you, bro.
I didn't tell you that. I did not tell you that. But I mean, like in this.
I'm just messing around. I saw the email that side, and I was like, I'm gonna bring that up.
Right.
I take my laptop with me.
Right. The 8-day class that's starting in a couple days. It's really easy. If you're gonna go to Disneyland,
like, this is the time.
You didn't hear.
I still have a day left on my 3-day California resident pass. So.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's what I would say, guys.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So about the flashcards. So like from what chapter to what chapters, like which words? I kind of remember if I go back to the book, like what words we gotta like, write down on the flashcards. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm less worried about the definitions.
Well, not definition, more like what are the words that we should be focusing on? Like I think I remember like you wanted us to get like I forgot what chapter was it. I think it was 3.
There are all the language and stuff. Yeah, that's going to be in the biomechanics chapter. Chapter 4. Chapter 2 is the movement. Chapter 3 is the chapter 4.
Wait,
4, okay.
I thought we just had to make flashcards of the muscles.
You do, okay. But he's just asking like in general, like what's helpful. The language stuff from chapter 4 is really helpful. Superior, inferior, lateral, medial.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah.
That stuff's very helpful.
And
you don't have to, but it can help you.
We do have homework tonight?
Yes, homework 3. So it's going to cover the ankle and the knee, right? It'll be those 2 PowerPoints from today and from yesterday. It'll be knee questions. It'll be ankle questions.
Got it. Cool.
Cool. All right.